Oh, okay.
The only person that's ready is Ron.
Yeah, Ron is ready. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a work session for Snowmass Village Town Council. We need...
No.
Oh, no, that's right. This is the, excuse me. This is a meeting of the General Improvement District Board to approve the 2017 budget. Rhonda, would you take roll call, please?
Yes. Butler? Circus?
Here.
Mattson?
Here.
Shank?
Here.
Good.
Here. Okay, so, we have, before we get to the actual budget, we have been asked to discuss whether or not we would like to, remove the advisory board for the GID advisory board, which acts as an ex officio board. And do we want to eliminate that from the hierarchy or the bureaucracy of the GID, General Improvement District? So, let me open up.
And if I might just, you're a chair, you're a vice chair on this board, I believe. Anyhow, you have two resolutions before you. The first resolution tonight is amending the budget for 2017. The GID's primary purpose is, well, one of its primary purposes is to operate the Skittles. There needed to be some budget adjustments this year to make sure that the Skittles can happen. So that's resolution number 1, I believe, that we're asking approval for. And then resolution number 2 is the budget for 2018. It's set up almost identical to 2017 budget numbers. And if you choose to approve resolution number 2, it is set up to have the elimination of the advisory board. The advisory board was there as a requirement when there was debt in the General Improvement District. That debt is now gone. The advisory board's been at half its membership for a number of years now. So rather than trying to go through that kind of those steps of having that meeting set up and making recommendations to the GID board, it's our recommendation that that advisory board be eliminated, and let's let the GID board have any kind of discussion that's necessary. So those are the two resolutions. They're set up that way. If the GID board does want to keep the advisory board, then we need to modify resolution number 2, and you all would need to tell us how you want to make those appointments.
So just a question, is there any potential for the GID to acquire debt in the future?
Sure. I mean, it's legally.
So
it would take a vote. I mean, it would have to go through the same provisions as Tabor. I defer to John on this, but it's subject to Tabor restrictions just like any other government in the state. So you'd have to go to a vote of the people to do so.
But I don't think that's your question. Your question is, can we dissolve the GID board and reconstitute it if you have a debt question?
yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you, John.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyone have any comments relative to the elimination of the advisory board for the GID?
I don't have any comments on it.
Bill, Melissa?
No, I didn't see it.
You think you should use the
Sorry,
mic?
I did not see it, so I didn't realize it was on the agenda. For some reason, this email went to my trash.
Okay,
So I'm just reading it now. But I'm listening.
okay.
And did you get the comments that were sent today? I'll make sure they get put in the record, but there was 2 emails
Yes.
for the GID meeting.
Yes, they were received today by email
And Stuart and Patricia, right? From Pat and Stuart.
from Stuart and Pat Kiefer, yes. Okay. All right, welcome, Madam Mayor, or Madam Commissioner. We're on the GID.
Good, go ahead while I get turned on here on this
Yeah, okay.
iPad.
So, all right. So with that, is there any discussion relative to either resolution number, well, let's take it one at a time. The resolution number 1, series of 2017, for amending the 2017 budget for the Snowmass Village General Improvement District, number 1. Any discussion? Any questions? Hearing none. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Then, next we'll tackle resolution number 2, series of 2017. Resolution summarizing revenues and expenditures for the Snowmass Village General Improvement District, number 1 of the town of Snowmass Village, Colorado, and adopting a budget and appropriating sums of money for the calendar year beginning on the first day of January 2018 and ending on the last day of December 2018. Marianne, do you have any comments you would like to make?
Just two in this budget. Last year, we had budgeted $50,000 for a consultant to review options on the Skittles. We did not spend that in 17, so we zeroed that out when you approved resolution number 1. That is back in the budget for 2018. And then the ski company has 2 items to take care of on the Skittles. One is the reconditioning of the motor, and then the other is to replace some wheel bearings. And so that's an addition of $24,000 in the 18 budget as well.
Okay, anyone have any other questions relative to the proposed 2018 budget?
Dan, we'll have to brief Emily on that.
I don't.
Nope, hearing none.
Typically go through
Um,
details.
Would anyone like to make a motion that we approve with the elimination of the advisory board?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
You know what? I'll second it. I'll second it. You know, can I take that back for a second, John?
Well, you can have discussion.
The discussion is, I haven't had a chance to completely review Stuart and Pat's email that came in late today, because I was driving and couldn't read it, but I tried to catch up with it before coming, and I'm not completely sure that how I feel about it yet. So I know I went and seconded it, and we're having that discussion, but I haven't had a chance to really look at it totally yet. Because I think the email came in, at 10 o'clock this morning or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, and they're big emails.
And I don't want to speak on their behalf, but their position or their point they're making was on the overall tax rate. I don't know that either one of those emails spoke to the advisory board themselves. I don't know that the advisory board was in there. And I don't know if that was just an omission or not, but their broader points were to the overall tax rate and their
And my understanding is that their biggest objection is that they're being taxed to pay for the Skittles and the snow melt, correct?
correct.
Right, they think Snowmass Tourism should be paying for it.
Right.
And so
Or anybody else?
Right.
Right,
So
but they specifically.
if you live in that area, you pay your property taxes that everybody in the community does. Then they pay a property tax to the metro districts, and then they pay a property tax to the GID. And their concern is the overall tax rate. The GID's obligation is for snowmelt and Skittles, and that was the deal when the whole base village was approved back in '04-ish.
Somewhere along the line in the last couple of weeks, I think you sent out an email about the potential for the Skittles to be improved for high speed and everything, and it was just an elaborate amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And if something like that were to happen, would that burden be on them, or would that be on the town?
I mean, it'd be up to the GID board and the town council to make that decision. I mean, I think there's a variety of funding mechanisms that can be explored, and all we've done at this point is to kind of get that ballpark figure of what those costs could be.
Okay.
I'm just quickly reading this. Thank goodness for Doug, who fixed my little iPad today. But just skimming, I don't see anything relative to the advisory committee at all.
They
Unless
were-
I miss,
neither
it's all
one are-
about
neither
taxes.
one are
I don't think there was.
No, there's nothing there.
I don't think there was.
No, it's all
One
about
of, I mean,
taxpayers.
one of their complaints is the lack of representation on this board. Now, I don't know how, you know, whether this board was set up in this manner, in the original documentation, you know, and,
I can help you with that. It's set up by statute.
yeah.
An improvement district is created by statute. The statute requires the body of the municipality within which the general improvement district is located to be the ex officio board of the GID. There's no requirement of an advisory board, but in the petition organizing this general improvement district to provide for representation, the 3 members of the development team were named along with the town manager, the finance director, and the public works director to evaluate the service plan each and every year. And the service plan was amended in that the GID pays only for operations and maintenance of this. They don't, you're not in debt. And the reason that happened is the metro districts, the 2 metro districts and the general improvement districts agreed that it would be far more economical and economically efficient to issue 1 set of bonds rather than issue 3 sets of bonds. So there was an intergovernmental agreement to actually save those costs. And by that agreement, the GID did not issue any debt. The GID levels a mill levy every year to pay for the operations and the maintenance of the public improvements. The public improvements were, I'll go way back now. Clearly, everybody remembers that the snow melted road didn't start till about the bottom of the Stone Bridge Inn there at Lower Willows. That's because it wasn't necessary. The grades between the roundabout up to the bottom of Stonebridge, Lot 1, weren't steep enough to require it. However, when buildings of the height that they are were proposed, the shading became to the point where all that had to be snow melted. Well, development pays its own way. That was the condition of the approval, that these roads be snow melted and that the people, the ownership of the property there do that. The other component that the GID is responsible for is the operation of the SkyCab, the Pulse Gondola. That was provided by the applicant, and it was provided as a method of transportation. So the reduction in parking and road size and capacities, based on analysis of the time, there was a reduction for that. And as part of that, the representatives of the property owners said, we will operate this in perpetuity through this general improvement district. So the point that is made in these emails is that there is the cost of the improvements are directly assessed against the benefiting property owners. And they are the benefiting property owners, okay? Because without their development, there would be no need for an alternative transportation system or snow melted roads. And that's how this all came to be what it is.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have a motion that has been seconded on the floor. All in favor? I don't hear anybody wanting to have any other comment, so
Aye.
I'm
Aye.
calling the question.
Yeah.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the 2018 budget is approved with the elimination of the GID Advisory Board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Your last item is just the minutes from last year.
Oh, I forgot the minutes, yeah. Okay, so we have minutes from last year, December 12th, the GID District Number 1. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve.
I'm going to second them.
Thank you, both. Any discussion, question, or correction to the minutes? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Not hearing none, minutes are approved. So now,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you. To second the motion to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The GID meeting is adjourned.
Okay. Work session, let's pop it up.
Are you ready to go? or-
Oh, yeah. Just a few little, trying to figure out what happened today. But I'm back up and running.
Okay.
This evening, we're very, very fortunate to have Ralph Trapani and Dan Blankenship be our guest to talk about the ITSP, and of course, Mr. Peckler. So is there any intro that is necessary, because everybody knows who Ralph is by now? Everybody knows who Dan is, and everybody knows who Dave Peckler. Peckler, you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. We appreciate your allowing us time to talk over. RAFT is in the middle of their integrated transportation system plan analysis. Has far-reaching impacts on the entire Roaring Fork and I-70 corridor. I'd like to also introduce Emily Cashto. She's with Parsons Group and is assisting with this presentation as well. So sometimes if you have some details, they might go back to the back row. So.
Emily, well, welcome. This is a work session. We're no longer in regular session. Do you want to join us up here, or? I think it would be wise versus calling you up and. Ralph, I know you got all the detail,
there
but
you
was,
go. Now you're in trouble.
Actually, Emily does the work. I just present it.
oh, well. You get paid the big bucks. See, I
I
know
would
how
say,
those
yeah,
are.
without any further ado, Dan and Ralph will be walking you through an update that the RAFTA board has just had at their strategic retreat and let you know where they're going with this, this study.
Well, thank you, Dave, and if it pleases the board, I'll start right in. We've got a few slides and a few handouts, and this is the third of, I think, 12 of these we're doing. We did the Glenwood Chamber last week and Picken County Commissioners last week, so you're the third in the list. So what we'll do is review the ITSP process and where we are, present the alternatives and the phasing plans, talk a little bit about the preliminary funding analysis, and let you all know what the next steps are. So we've been starting these presentations out talking about the momentum that RAFT has got in the two valleys. RAFT is the second largest transportation authority in Colorado, the largest rural transit authority in the United States, moving over 5 million riders annually. Not only does the RAFTA contribution reduce traffic congestion, but improves human health and air quality and allows everybody mobility and accessibility. After extensive public and elected official outreach, the consensus is that people want RAFTA to do more. An interesting fact about our region is the non-driving mode share for the two valleys is roughly 30%, which is double the national average, and that's a real feather in our cap. And what that means is 30% of the people are on active transportation, and that's walking and biking, and on transit. So this is a pretty impressive number, and this is a number RAFTA developed from the travel pattern study. RAFTA really exceeds expectations at the AM peak, particularly up here at the upper end of the valley. 40% of the commuters going into downtown Aspen are on RAFTA, and mostly on the BRT. RAFTA, of course, carries 59,000 passengers for that big day in the X Games, and they saved our bacon in Glenwood Springs on the Grand Avenue Bridge, and we are very glad that the bridge opened last Tuesday. The traffic in Glenwood has disappeared. I've been doing this for 42 years and would have never believed it had I not seen it. But it's great, and everybody's pretty happy down there. But this system requires investment. And again, RAFTA gets called upon to do many things. The Upper Valley called upon RAFTA to provide the Maroon Creek shuttle. I'm going to go out on the limb and predict before too long Hanging Lake shuttle will be operated by RAFTA also. So RAFTA generally gets called upon pretty regularly to take up the slack. So let me get into the process here, see if I've got a, yeah, I do have a little bit of a cursor. There we go. So we kicked this thing off in March of 2016, went through the first stage, which is here in red, which was defining the vision. We did a lot of outreach at that point, convened a technical advisory committee. David's a member of that, and we appreciate his participation. We did an organizational and efficiency review of RAFTA and discovered, as compared around the country, it's a highly efficient organization. And it's also very challenging to find an organization like RAFTA. It's very unique to run a 90-mile linear corridor the way that RAFTA does from Rifle to Aspen. Last summer, moving into this year, we worked on the stage 2 work, which was the transportation demand modeling, looking at land use, doing some planning around service improvements. And that got us into the stage that we're wrapping up, and that's the purpose here, is to kind of show you the wrap-up on stage 3, which was analyze options, and we're moving essentially into stage 4. I'm quite pleased and frankly honored to report that RAFTA board approved our stage 4 scope and budget last week, and we'll be moving ahead on that. So Dan, if you want to pass out, you can pass out this one first, please. This is a little bit different to have Dan doing this, but anyway, he volunteered.
Sure.
All right, thank you.
I can pass it to these two.
There we go.
My
part
of that is over.
What you're seeing now is basically the full-scale list of alternatives, and there's about 70 improvements identified. About 50 of them are within RAFTA's jurisdiction, and the improvements that are not in RAFTA jurisdiction essentially are in unincorporated Garfield County, Rifle. And a lot of people don't realize it, like the ranch at the Roaring Fork is unincorporated Garfield County. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. There are components of unincorporated Garfield County in this, right in the Roaring Fork Valley corridor. But the way those improvements broke down is, 9 service improvements, transportation, demand management, and bike share, roughly 3 parking, park and ride, and bus stops. Again, a lot of improvements there. There's bus replacement, bus expansion, 7 improvements related to pedestrian crossings and trail. And of course, to do all these great things, you need maintenance facilities, housing, and office space. And on your handout, and I'm not going to get into this handout in too much detail, we've made an attempt to highlight some of the yellow to show you what is maybe specific for Snowmass Village that would be of interest to you. And Dan pointed out, and I have to agree with him, that on the first page, when you go down, right above the yellow improvement that says better transit connections to Snowmass Village, those service optimizations are also going to benefit Snowmass Village. And let me get into some of the highlights. The big highlight here is better transit service connections to Snowmass Village on Brush Creek Road, with the cost includes incremental costs for spring, fall, and for summer. I know that's been a hot topic at the EOTC. That is included in here, and it's shown as A4. Another one that's important is the Upper Valley parking management, which reflects the work necessary to utilize both the Brush Creek lot and the Buttermilk lot for parking needs, particularly for Intercept and going into Aspen, and also, of course, for you folks to intercept at Brush Creek. I know that's important. Of course, the Snowmass Transit Center is in here now. We almost forgot this. David reminded us to include this. This is kind of a new one. That's B7. And bus expansion, of course, the additional buses you need to run from Snowmass Village to Brush Creek. That's E5. And a component of this is all electric buses. So, we're leaving you all with this because this is a dynamic project list. And as the RAFTA board moves ahead with their decision-making around a potential ballot initiative in November of 2018, this list is going to change as we get more input from the RAFTA board, the member communities, and so on. But this is our starting point. And let me talk a little bit about how we came up with this list, and particularly how the funding is proposed, the possibilities to move this proposed funding ahead. We did evaluate the existing RAFTA revenue sources. Mass transit tax, the Regional Transit Authority sales and use tax. RAFTA gets a majority of their funding. About 60% of their funding comes from sales tax, which is not unique. That's kind of how a lot of transit systems operate in America. There's service agreements. RAFTA has service agreements with Glenwood to run the circulator, Aspen, SKICO, and so on. RAFTA does a good job of attracting both state and federal grant revenue. David Johnson's a great grant writer. David's pulled in some money, even some grant money to help pay for this planning process. And then, of course, there's operating revenue, which is a fare box. So those are the existing RAFTA revenue sources. We looked at other potential local revenue sources. Lane usage fee, which is a fancy word for tolls. We know that's not very popular. Utility fees, a special improvement district. Well, the RTA is almost like a special improvement district. The conversation about expanding sales and use taxes is a difficult conversation because Snowmass Village, like many of our member communities, are almost maxed out with sales tax now. Lodging tax is something that, again, is not that popular. Parking revenues is an option. And I think Aspen already does this, where some of their parking revenues go to support the transit. Naming rights, advertising, private contributions, again, we wanted to raise that. I don't think that that's a significant potential local revenue source. And we come down to property tax. There is an opportunity, because RAFTA is an RTA, and under state law, they can seek a property tax for up to 5 mills. And that's what we're going to be focusing on here as we move ahead with this presentation. So to evaluate the property tax, the planning team did a mill levy sensitivity analysis. And this was admittedly a coarse analysis. This is what you've got to do at the front end of these to provide information to the good people at the RAFTA board, yourselves. But first of all, we worked with RAFTA to develop a funding location for the initial set of alternatives. So we developed a short, medium, and long-term implementation. Short term's 5 years, roughly from 2019 out to 2024. If we did a sales tax in November of 18 and it passed, revenues wouldn't be coming in till 19. The medium term is about another 10 to 15 year term that gets us from 2013 up into the 2030s. And then the long term gets us through the 2030s up to almost 2040. This is a 20-year plus planning horizon we're working at. So we made some assumptions. Number one mill generates about 3.5 million per year, 3.5 or 3.6. We use 3.5. The mill levy was looked at to cover all the short-term improvements, capital and O&M costs, except for the out-of-service area improvements. The RAFTA board did direct us to not include circulators and silt and rifle and expanded service out to West Garfield County, for example. The improvements were done in year of expenditure dollars. I'm sorry, were not done in year of expenditure dollars. They're all done in 2016 dollars. We didn't do any escalation at this point. As we move into stage 4, we'll do that. But again, to move this ahead, a very simple assumption was made that the escalation for the projects would be close to equal the additional property tax revenues you get, because everybody's property seems to be increasing since the recession at least. And this analysis only includes new improvements in their O&M costs that you see in this 4-page list we handed out. It doesn't get into RAFTA's annual operating budget except for bus replacements and expansion. But as we move into stage 4, we'll be bringing in additional financial help and we'll be merging those two items. But again, this is an opportunity to just kind of get everybody with some set of ideas and knowledge about how this would move out. So we took this big project list and did a analysis around short-term improvements. And what our goal was to try to get as many service improvements and safety improvements in the first 5 years, and that's kind of generally how we did it. Well, at one mill, we don't get very far. You can see we've got about over 127 million in unfunded work in the short term. None of the safety improvements get done, none of the service improvements get done. Basically, all you get is bus replacement at one mill. We ran it at 3 mill and things started looking a little bit better. You do get service improvements. You get some TDM, you get some parking and parking ride in purple. You also get a significant amount of contribution to the bus replacement and expansion, and you've got an unfunded balance of about 92 million in the short term there. When you get to 5 mills, things really start happening at that point. You get mostly all of your service improvements, TDM. You can pull in pedestrian crossing improvements, which are very important safety features. A lot of funding for bus replacement. You can see again that gets us what we need for bus replacement. It does leave some money for trails, and that particular number there reflects the design and engineering for the Lova Trail, which is a trail segment from West Glenwood to connect out west towards Newcastle. And you have a unfunded portion at that point of about 37 million. So many key projects can be done at 5 mills. But the point I'd like to make here is the RAFTA board has not made a determination on this yet. They haven't even made a determination as to whether they're going forward with this or not. But we've got the data at least so that the elected officials like yourselves can start seeing what the sensitivities are of a 1 to 5 mil exercise. This data is going to be used as we move ahead with the polling. There's going to be some additional polling done in the first of the year to give the RAFTA board some guidance on ballot language, what people think about these improvements. RAFTA did solicit a poll from our election consultant, Mr. Bill Ray. He was at our board meeting last week. And the initial poll, I don't include it in this presentation, but Marky, I know you remember, there was a very broad question answered, and I'm just going to paraphrase it. It says something like, would you be willing to take a tax increase if you could, improve the transportation facilities? Well, that was a totally open-ended question, and about 250 people answered that survey. It was a pre-recorded telephone survey. Maybe some of you heard it. And we had a surprisingly high number. 49% people agreed to that, which according to our pollster, our election consultant, tells me that's unprecedented for people to agree. And on that basis, I think we presented that at the board retreat, and that's the basis for RAFTA asking us to move ahead. Dan, if you can hand me that other sheet. This will pass around. This sheet, as it goes around, actually shows in pretty good detail how all of these projects fit together, and you can tell I've not even attempted to have Emily put these on slides. So you can take a look at any of the projects then and get an idea of where they fit in, either in the short, medium, and long term. I'm just going to talk to this because we've all got it in front of us now. And this was done basically for 5 mills, so it'll give you an idea. So just kind of running down here on 5 mills, you can see the fixed guideway is not going to get funded. It's a pretty high cost. But A2, the optimized bus system from, which would be the short-term phasing, which would be electric buses, that would get completed. The preferred alternative going across Marolt, there's not consensus there right now, so again, you don't see that until you get out to the long term. And that also includes the ability to go to the autonomous buses. Without the Marolt crossing, you can't do autonomous buses, in my opinion. But moving down, a little more good news. At 5 mil, you can see all the service improvements get accomplished, and that includes your service improvements up here to get to Snowmass on Brush Creek Road, expansion in Glenwood Springs. We get into TDM, bike share gets completely handled, and so on. I won't go down here in too much detail, but again, some of the hot buttons for you good folks, the Upper Valley parking management and Buttermilk, that gets fully funded. Park and ride expansion up and down gets fully funded, although you see the park and ride expansions at Brush Creek go out into the medium term there. We get the PED crossings a little bit further down in the D range, and we get, again, the bus expansion that we need down there at the bottom, the E5 series. So this is a pretty impressive project list, and with 5 mills after about 2023, there's going to be a dramatic improvement in the RAFTA service if that's the direction the board decides to go. And I want to emphasize this is very dynamic and fluid, and as the board decides to move ahead or not move ahead, if they do decide to move ahead, there's going to be changes to this. But this is our starting point, and this is what we're going into stage 4 with. And I know it's complicated, but you folks can keep this stuff, and I'll guarantee you the next time we talk, you'll probably have some different ideas about how this phasing works. So just quickly, We did a course analysis of what a 5 mill levy looks like. It's about $36 annually per $100,000 assessed value. This slide originally showed some median price values for Aspen and Glenwood and Carbondale and Newcastle, and I about got thrown out of the room. I took those numbers off of Zillow, and I think we had the average price of a home in Aspen at $1.4 million, which Mark, you laugh sad, and it turns out Zillow isn't a very good place to go to pick up values like that.
Yeah, well, it's all about advertising.
Yeah, so, but this will give you all, you know, the residential, at least, property owners will get a handle on what this amounts to. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying, like Glenwood Springs, an average median home is about a $500,000 home. So that would be about $180 a year tax burden on a typical home in Glenwood, for example. I'm not even going to try to do that analysis up here in Snowmass Village because I know I'll be wrong.
We ought to get some numbers out there because it's gonna be in the newspaper.
And Marky, we understand that. Part of their scope as we move ahead is to do a detailed analysis of the mill levies because residential gets reduced because of the legislative rules. So business properties and other non-residential properties do get taxed higher, and we will be doing that analysis as we move into the next stage. We'll also be describing kind of how the various communities contribute to a property tax. We know right now a lot of sales tax comes out of Aspen and Glenwood Springs. I would just suggest on a property tax revenue stream, there'd be a significant contribution by the Upper Valley because this is where the valuable property is. So we'll be moving ahead with that, and we'll have a lot better information as we move into stage 4. And again, that's where we're going with this in stage 4 now. We'll be moving very rapidly through the holidays in the first of the year. We'll be working with RAFT as financial consultant to develop a financing plan, working up basically a model that'll allow Mike Yangs, the RAFT finance director, and Dan and his group to move ahead with the data that we need to help the board make a decision. And the decisions need to be made by summer to move this to a November 18 ballot initiative. I know there's probably a lot of need for questions and discussions, so I'm going to kind of stop right here and let's take some questions. I know I presented a lot of material.
Just if you go back 2 slides, I know just one thing when we discuss property values, and you've got assessed value, and you kind of touched on it, but if you could do the property costs or the cost per market value, all as bureaucrats can make that conversion, but I think that makes it a lot easier for folks because they have a rough idea what their house costs. But when you have to provide my house costs minus or at 9% equals times 0.005, it's a lot harder math. So just for communication purposes, I think the annual cost per market rate, 100,000, might be an easier way to communicate that real cost.
That's great, Clint. We'll do that. We also got a comment at the board meeting last week, which we should do it by month because everybody pays their mortgage by month. So I've been getting a lot of input on this, and we're going to have to probably do multiple slides to address the various ways that we're
So for the average home in Snowmass Village, what would be the number?
Well, if this is 100,000 of assessed, so if a $1 million house at 9% is
$400.
$90,000.
Yes.
If I'm doing my math right, so a $1 million house would pay $36 annually, if I understand that slide correct.
Wait, what?
No.
It would be 360.
No.
Then that's not assessed value, that's market
I
value.
mean, when I did the math, it said if you had a $3 million house, it was $1,080.
That's what I,
But
That's
then-
what I think,
Then that's
too.
at market value, not at assessed value. Again, bureaucratic difference, but that's a very significant difference between assessed value and market value. And if somebody already did that math to get that, then I'm right there with you, but clarifying the difference between those two is gonna be important going
No,
forward.
that's a good point, and I, even though I'm a recovering highway engineer, I do understand the difference between assessed value and market value, and we need to make that clear, Clint. Thank you.
so in
That, Emily? Okay.
well, you know, we just passed a few taxes up here, which I told you was okay. But we got it for the firehouse, we got it for the water and sand, and we got it for the school. And people are a little nervous about property tax right now,
I understand.
very nervous.
And at the board meeting last week, there was discussion about the failure down valley with, there was a museum tax and there was some
Right,
CMC
right.
stuff. And Bill Ray's opinion, our election consultant, is this is about the only place in the state that didn't approve taxes. Even El Paso County approved a tax for transportation, and some of you might have seen the nearly $1 billion bond issue that Denver reported. Bill did a quick analysis of everything around the state, and this seemed to be kind of a unique enclave, at least down valley, where those weren't approved. And I'm not going to even go into the reasons there, so it's all speculative at this point.
My opinion, Dan, is that there's not enough in here for Snowmass Village residents to raise approve an increase in their taxes, in their property tax at this point.
Have you, can you give us some suggestions of what might maybe people would like?
Well, go ahead.
Since
You
I
start and I'll finish and we'll.
I get to do this quite frequently.
I know you do.
Is that headway, and we've chosen not to do it, and we've chosen not to do it, and I know Newman believes, he chairs RAFTA, that if we did the mill, the 5 mil, or whatever we do, is then that's how we argue for people to improve it, to go ahead and approve it. The corollary of that argument, and I will tell you, my husband can drive me crazy, love him to death, hope you're not listening. But we got into this conversation after the RAFTA board. He says, now we have been paying RAFTA taxes for I don't know how long. And we can't get any improvements. We do get improvements. You don't get improvements. You haven't shown me anything. I'm just paraphrasing. So why would I vote for another $1,000 and I'm on a fixed income? And you know, we just did those other 3. You go ahead and finish.
Well, I mean, I look at this, and the first thing I'm going to say is I don't understand why the parking management plan, you consider that of value to Snowmass Village. So that's just more or less a question, but to me, that doesn't help us. Secondly, the money that EOTC has for Snowmass Village for the transportation center is already there. We could go out and spend that tomorrow. It has nothing to do, in my opinion, with a 5 mil tax increase. Okay?
You're talking the 6 million.
I'm talking about the $6 million. Yeah. Thirdly, there's nothing, I guess I'm looking at this and trying to do it in conjunction with the Upper Valley Mobility Study. And I know that they're kind of 2 separate things, but they're also kind of connected. And when I looked at the Upper Valley Mobility Study, I didn't see anything in those recommendations that would reduce the number of construction vehicles, construction employee vehicles that come up and down the valley every day. Now, there's a significant number of those vehicles. They add a lot to the traffic in the morning and to the afternoon. I don't see that, you know, and matter of fact, not only don't I see it, when I see things in the Upper Valley Mobility Study, like flexible parking rates based on, you know, I guess, demand, that to me makes it harder for a construction guy who's coming in to find a place to park. That person has to pay more money because that's where the demand is in the morning.
Have to pass it on to the owner.
You know, and that gets, somebody's got to pay for that. And I don't know, I walk away from, lately, I have walked away from all this transportation stuff thinking that it's all for the advantage of Aspen, and basically the rest of us in the valley have to pay for it, are being asked to pay for it.
I understand.
Okay? And I don't know. I guess that's where I am at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back, though. Are there specific projects here that we missed? Because that's one thing I'm concerned about, because we did a pretty exhaustive set of outreach and bringing in technical advisory committee, probably met 3 or 4 times in the space of the last year and a half. And you don't have to answer that right now, but that's part of this kind of outreach we're doing now, is if there's feedback, then you can send it back through David. We're gonna be having another technical advisory committee meeting probably in March of next year.
So let's do one. Snowmass Transit Centers, short term, 5% partially funded. How about the other 95%?
So 6 million of that would come from EOTC funds, which
Right.
are separate dollars.
And
So
this is $11 million, probably north of that.
we don't know yet. That's what we've got
Yeah.
money this year to find that out. But 6 million would come from our local
Yeah.
EOTC, and then this is in addition to that. And I think the question for us to ask is, what was RAFTA's participation in Ruby Park, and are we getting kind of an equitable level of participation in those types of projects? I mean, that would be, but I don't know what that 5%
No, I
equates
don't.
to.
Well, when this question came up, we had a discussion with RAFT about a consistency with Ruby Park. Yeah, so you raise a very good point there. And from a policy perspective, that's kind of where we are right now, before we start moving into hearing individual concerns.
And I believe that was about $500,000.
Yeah, it was a $500,000 contribution.
And Ruby Park wasn't bring something from the ground.
That's
This-
correct.
this could
It was
be-
a Band-Aid rehab.
It was yes, it was a rehab. It's a whole different animal, so
Understand.
equity is not exactly the same, depending on what we're gonna do with the transit center, which our study will tell us. But I know our previous transit center, the design for that was north of 20 million, wasn't it, Dave?
Yes.
And it was,
But it included a tremendous amount of parking.
yes,
We look at the scope, that's why we plugged 12, because that would be the deck for a transit improvement.
Madam Mayor, if I
Yeah,
might
sure, this is
say
work
a few
session.
things about Ruby Park. Ruby Park started out to be a rehab or remodel, but it was basically a scrape with a completely new structure. And I think it had a total cost of about $9 million. RAFTA provided $500,000 in cash for that, and then we provided construction management services. We also applied for some grants, and I think we were successful kind of working in partnership with Aspen to get about $2 million plus in grant funding, and the balance came from EOTC funds and from cash contributions from the city. We're kind of proposing to do the same thing with the Snowmass Transportation Center. I think there's a $500,000 placeholder for a cash contribution, and also we could, if the town wanted us to, we could provide some in-kind construction management services, which, you know, it's a fairly significant value, I think, to have those, and we've done that at the ABC and in Basalt. But before I go to touch on a couple of other things that Bob pointed out, this is kind of a negotiated process, right? So this is an initial list with a lot of different projects, and what we're finding out through this process is that some communities actually have some projects they'd like to see happen that aren't on this list. Or they might see some of the projects on this list as a higher priority than they appear on this list, or the dollar values to be a little different than we have as placeholders. So we have a long ways to go as far as this is concerned, and Snowmass has a seat at the table, and there might be some potential to increase the level of funding that's designated for the Snowmass Transit Center, because I think David was saying that overall it was about a $12 million cost. You've got $6 million in the EOTC funds, and then there's a gap. So some of that gap could be filled with funds from grants, and some from construction management, some from some cash contribution from RAFTA. As far as other things that I think the town will benefit from that were not highlighted on this multi-page spreadsheet are improvements in the off-season services, for example. Right now, service cuts back to once an hour after 8:15, and so we're looking at increasing the frequency of service to every half hour, and running that half-hour service all the way to Glenwood Springs.
Right.
Then also, we're planning on running the BRT service in the off-seasons as well. And so there might be a few adjustments that we have to make with the current services that are running in the Brush Creek corridor, because I think we didn't put money in the budget to run that 15-minute frequency on the weekends, because there's currently no BRT service, or at least traditionally there's not BRT services on the weekends. We've been running it during the GAB, but then we'll go back to the normal schedule. So that's something that I think the town benefits from directly, in that when we make the cuts that going from the winter to the spring, we typically hear from people that are going to Snowmass that we've done it too soon, or we've made it more difficult for them to get to their jobs in Snowmass. And they frequently ask us to have a more consistent level of service on a year-round basis. The other thing is that, which is big, but it's not like, you know, this is something new that we're getting. But part of why we need to get some additional funding, whether from this source or from sales tax, or, you know, wherever else we can find it, is that we have 100 buses in our fleet, and we have to replace them every 15 years. We have facilities that need to be expanded. Aspen Maintenance Facility, we can park most of the buses indoors, but we need to park a few more indoors. And down Valley, we're really tight in our Glenwood Maintenance Facility, and all the buses are parked outdoors, outside. And those buses, many of them find their way up Valley, bringing commuters up and then going into skier shuttle service and then taking commuters down. As we've looked at our forecasts for ridership and growth in the future, we're looking at about 25% over maybe 20 years, and that's very conservative.
Probably very conservative.
But we really don't have room in our facilities to absorb that kind of growth. And there are certainly some adverse impacts on the environment. We have to start buses up at 3 o'clock in the morning if they have a 5 o'clock pullout, idle them for a couple hours to get them somewhat warm inside. And then that uses a lot of extra fuel. It puts emissions into the atmosphere. And then many of those first customers to get on the bus to ride up Valley they complain that it's a little cold inside. We really need to address that issue, because all of these buses, most of them, except for the over-the-road coaches that are 45 feet long, they end up in Snowmass at one time or another. And so this is about kind of making RAFT a more sustainable for what it's doing now, because many of the assets that we have were acquired with some federal participation, either at 80% or 50% or somewhere in between. And a lot of that federal funding is either going away or it's very uncertain. Right. State funding is not very plentiful either currently. And there's a lot of competition for the limited funding that's available. And so we've been really good in the past at getting, you know, half a BRT funded, lots of buses paid for, the Aspen Maintenance Facility upgraded with federal funds, because we've been very aggressive about going after that funding. But the reality is we may not be able to get that in the future. And so unless we find some local source of funding to help make us sustainable and to make us ready to absorb additional growth in the future, we're going to have to retrench. And that's going to affect Snowmass, and it's going to affect Aspen, and it's going to affect every other community in the Roaring Fork Valley. And nobody likes paying taxes. I've got a house, I got to pay taxes too. But if it's something that's vital and it's important for the community, sooner or later, I think, and we're further along than many communities in terms of the amount of local support we have, but we've got to get to the point where the meat and potatoes of what it takes to run our services and to keep them sustainable and keep the equipment maintained and replaced on a timely schedule. We're going to have to fund more of that locally. That's the reality.
That's
that
the
we
message.
face.
That is the message.
And if people are unwilling to do that, and we've done this a couple of times at elections that we've had in the past, we're after, so, well, this is the choice. We've got, if we want these things, then we need to approve some additional funding. If we don't want to approve that funding, then this is what we're going to have to do. And there's going to be some sacrifices, there's going to be some loss of what we currently have, because unfortunately, we don't have a printing press at Rafta where we can make our own money. I wish we did, but, you know, we cannot belly up as an organization, and we can't operate in the red for very long, so.
So here's a question, we know the need is there, okay? One of the questions that we will get is, why can't they live within their own means? And you've heard that question too. We're gonna need to be prepared to answer that.
And I think part of the answer to that has, you know, I've already given that answer, is that we got a lot of our assets with federal funds. But the other part is that people want more. They keep wanting more, and we keep growing it, and we keep growing it. And and we've gone through major expansions over time, and generally what we find is that we don't always estimate correctly what it's going to take to sustain that and support it a long time. Then we have to kind of backfill. And we're at that point. It's not that we can't cut back. We can live within our means. We have a lot of bandwidth there. There's a lot we can cut and have a really great system for what we do, but we just won't be able to do what we do today.
Dan, quick question on the, you referred to the 5 a.m. bus and how to get it ready at 3 in the morning, and it's still cold. So with the bus improvement and replacements to electric, in regards to, are we going to be eliminating maintenance people now that we have electric buses, and how are we going to keep these electric buses, or get these electric buses warm enough at 5 a.m. in the morning? What's the process that you foresee happening there?
Well, I think initially the buses that we're going to have that are electric are going to be stored at the Aspen maintenance facility, so they can be stored indoors there. We are, you know, we're still determining whether or not we'll actually be able to get any electric buses. But there are, you know, charging systems in the facility where we'll charge the buses. Then there are auxiliary heaters you can put on electric buses, at least initially, that can be gas-fired, gasoline, or diesel. That's not our preferred alternative, but that may be something that we can do to ensure that when it's cold and we have all the electronics and the heat going, that we can still operate the buses, not have to bring them in early off their routes. There are also, there's the potential for inline chargers so that buses can get kind of topped off at various points along the route. But initially, the electric buses would be stored in Aspen, so they would be indoors, and it would not be, you know, that it's probably 50 degrees, 45, 50 degrees inside the maintenance facility, and that will solve that problem.
Has there been any talk of, I know we've talked to the intercept lot in regards to improving the intercept lot, whether it's bathrooms, coffee shop, or whatever. We seem to have some room down there. Is it possible to think along the lines of electric buses being stored in a facility that could be built at the intercept lot?
I think that's a really good question about whether or not it would make sense to have some type of a maintenance facility at the intercept lot. If there were going to be light rail or something like that, that would probably be a logical place to put it. If we were going to see substantial expansion of the need for storage capacity and maintenance capacity up in the Upper Valley, then, you know, you might want to look at that option and sell off the property by the
You
North
were
Fork.
talking about a potentially 25% by 2025. Is that the number you were
Right,
using?
right.
Okay.
I think our preferred way of managing this is to do a smaller expansion of indoor storage up in Aspen that might accommodate another 15 buses or so there. And then expand the Glenwood maintenance facility so that we could have 60 buses stored inside there and then room to park some others outside. But that capacity would probably be only needed towards the kind of the tail end of that 20-year period, if then. Because so much of our service originates out of the Glenwood maintenance facility to bring people up valley in the mornings and then maintain the vehicles at night. And also, we're serving the I-70 corridor. And in time, we think that the services there are going to increase and we'll need more storage capacity, either in Glenwood or possibly in Parachute.
If we did a linkage with ecosystem, which obviously is here, do you have an idea of what that might cost?
You know, we did a study, I think it was in 2010 or 2011, to see what that connection would be. It was a bare bones service, and I don't have a number right off the top of my head.
Yeah, we made an estimate,
Was that-
Markey, of about 2.3 million capital costs and about about $750,000 a year.
About
to
800,000 in operating costs. And we were thinking that we would, you know, try to work out some, if we were going to do that, partnership with ECO and get
Yep.
them to share some of those costs. They could maybe operate the service even. But ECO is, I would say, probably in a similar circumstance. Most transit agencies across the United States are in similar circumstances to RAFTA, in that they have greater needs than they have resources. So, you know, that service has not been viewed as being a high priority for them or us as other ones that we are currently
Just a
providing.
ballpark there.
What is, Dan, excuse me, but what is eco-service?
That's Eco Transit. Currently, they provide service in the I-70 corridor on Highway 6 and 24 over there from, I guess they might have it as far as
Dot Zero?
.0 to Leadville. And they connect Vale and Avon and Beaver Creek with commuter services along the valley floor, and then they have a service that runs up to Leadville.
Thank you.
Other questions? I know we're hitting you with a lot of information here, and again, I want to emphasize that this is a dynamic list, and it is interesting for me because when I talked to the Glenwood Chamber, they didn't think they were getting their fair share either. And what they wanted was a new road here and a new road there, and I felt like I was back at the DOT
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
And I'm
does.
sorry, this is a transit agency here. We're not looking at funding many roads here, although the Upper Valley Mobility Study did identify the completion of the preferred alternative. But it's shown in here, but it's not funded because there's not consensus. But as we move forward, going into next year, and we're going to move very quickly, there's going to be many additional, there's going to be a monthly board meeting with the RAFTA board. There's going to be additional outreach probably starting in March or April to tune this thing up. But you're always welcome to feed information back through David. We keep in pretty close touch with him, and you don't have to wait for us to show up again next year. And I know at the board, the other day, there was some discussion, you know, the bells and whistles is used, Christmas tree and ornaments is used.
Make it sexy.
But for example, Mayor Gamba from Glenwood Springs, good guy, he was a great mayor, he got us a Grand Avenue bridge, said, what's sexy about electric buses? Well, if you lived on a RAFTA bus route, you think an electric bus would be a pretty darn good improvement. So, buses may not be totally sexy to everybody, but those of us that live on the RAFTA route would love to see electric buses. And the way the technology is going, we're ready for the short-haul electric buses up here now. The technology is there, and probably in 5 years, we'll be able to run an electric bus from Glenwood to Aspen. And I think that's an important feature here as somebody that lives next to the RAFTA bus route. Because the technology is changing, and part of what this additional revenue will allow for is for RAFTA to keep up with that technology. I really wish I could be more positive about the state and federal, but as time goes on with this new administration in Washington, well, we've been there a year now, it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. We have no infrastructure plan. Some of the tax benefits for bonding that was there looks like it's going away.
Right.
With the new tax plan that was a key to making public-private partnerships work, that's going to possibly kill that whole idea. If all this happens, a mill levy happened and more federal funding came in, that would just be gravy on top, but we're not expecting that to happen. And you all probably noticed what happened at the state level, trying to get a transportation initiative through. It couldn't get any discussion on that at all, so it didn't go anywhere. But anyway, if there's not any questions, I appreciate everybody's everybody's time. I know it's a busy board, and I don't want to discourage you at all to feed more information to David now that you've got the project list. It looks to be a pretty big list, but it also has the potential to have missed things in communities that are not roads, that are transit improvements that ought to be done, so. Thanks for everybody's
Ralph,
attention.
question for you.
Thank you.
There's some overlap on these projects with the EOTC projects as well, right?
Yes, sir.
And how is that contemplated as you're proposing this plan?
Well, at this point, it's just a check mark in the box. When you look at the sheets you're looking at, you see funding by RAFTA grants local. That local box is where you'd go in for EOTC. And again, this is admittedly coarse, but if there was an opportunity to get EOTC funding, we would have checked that local box. Same for potentially getting money from the town of Snowmass. So that's how we handled that, at least at this point in time.
Okay.
We have not done a detailed analysis of getting EOTC funding for any of this.
Right.
That's not been done at this point.
And I think that the property tax issue is gonna be a challenge for the reasons that the mayor just explained. Have you considered, I believe the EOTC gets a half-penny sales tax, is that right? Have you explored maybe increasing the sales tax to EOTC?
We have not. I'm not sure, we'd have to check to see at one point, that half-cent sales tax is, it's authorized by state statute. It was passed in 1993. I'm not sure whether the legislature actually increased the authorizations for county to go after a penny for mass transit, in which case that would possibly be a source that could be used in the Upper Valley. There's also 0.6% sales tax that's remaining in Aspen, Snowmass, and Pickens County under the RAFTA authorization, because we're authorized to go up to a full 1%. Aspen, Pickens County, and Snowmass Village opted to dedicate pre-existing mass transit sales taxes, the 1 penny and the 1/2 penny, when they came into RAFTA. So whereas Glenwood Springs is capped at that 1% RAFTA authorization, there is still 0.6% left in Aspen, Snowmass, and Pickens County, because we levied 0.4% when we did BRT back in 2008. So we can't use that remaining amount that's available in some communities for a region-wide election, because you can't have Carbondale and Glenwood voting to approve sales taxes in Snowmass Village. That would be a slam dunk. But you could use it for local Upper Valley kinds of improvements. And that might be where we get into a little bit more of a detailed discussion about what your options are up here to fund some of these things. If you didn't want to do property tax and you want to do a sales tax, what would that generate, in comparison to a property tax? We get into a little bit of the same kind of issue, because then we couldn't have a region-wide property tax. And there's some advantages to doing that, because as it relates to the sales tax at least, the strength for support of the sales tax increase has always been stronger in Aspen, Snowmass, and Pickens County than it has been in the other communities. In 2004, although we did a region-wide, we went back and looked at the votes in every community. In Glenwood Springs, 0.2% region-wide sales tax passed by 13 votes. So, and in this last election, in 2008, every community voted in except Newcastle. It went down by about 150 votes there, but they were pulled in by the support, majority of support in the other communities. But if you look at that support, it's wider up here and it just narrows as you go down the valley. So if that were not going to be the case with the property tax, then we'd have to think about that long and hard. But ultimately, we have to make the best case that we can to the voters for whatever taxing measure we present to them and whatever list of projects we ask them to approve. And we give them an alternative too. If we don't do this, these are some of the things that we're going to have to do to make sure that we can be sustainable long term.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're gonna have to explore every option possible based on the funding reduction that is on the horizon. And it looks like a lot of these projects are kind of Upper Valley projects as well, so I mean, I think that would be an easier sell to try and get that other 0.6%, then probably 5 mils up here, and unless we can sell it in maybe as a graduated property tax increase. I think it was proposed of 1% in the first year, 1 mil into 3 and 5 as it goes down the road. But yeah, it's an uphill battle. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, that half penny, if you use the other half penny, then you don't have a savings fund for other projects, so we'd have to figure out how we would fund EOTC in the various projects.
Yeah, there is, I think, about 0.1% left of that half cent.
Yeah.
The rest of it has been
Yeah.
dedicated to RAFTA. So if the state has authorized another countywide half penny potential, then
Right.
that might be a source of revenue for the EOTC. I don't think Bill was talking about using that last tenth, but rather maybe levying some of RAFTA's remaining 0.6% for Upper Valley types of improvements.
So Dan, the matrix is almost like a Christmas wish list, but, you know, the idea that most of the boxes under the funding are empty. There's not a lot. So the potential for possibly, or potential for those to be somewhat funded by the state is still open, correct?
Well, there is some potential for.
Because you have those boxes, there's not, in regards to grants, there's not a lot of checks on those boxes.
Right. Mhm.
I just quickly ran through the governor, there was an announcement today, the whole budget, and, yeah, it's pretty much what we heard a couple weeks ago. There's nothing there.
Where you, particularly on the operating side, Tom, we're already, we receive federal funds passed through the state. It's called Section 5311 operating assistance. We're the biggest grantee the state has. We got $1,014,000 this year and next. There's about $7 or $8 million to go statewide for all the rural systems. State is now going through a process to develop a methodology to reallocate the distribution of those funds to provide more equity and to allow some potential for new systems to get in. And so RAFT is going to be really looking at probably a reduction. Some of the methodologies we've seen so far would take us down to maybe 800,000 to 700,000 a year. So rather than growing, it's probably going
Can you
to
get
shrink. And on the state side, they have some faster funds. We compete very aggressively for those, and we use those for bus replacements, other capital projects, and then there's a little bit of operating assistance as well. But there's a lot of competition for it, and unless the pie is increased at the state level, I don't think we can count on a whole bunch more.
Okay.
Nope.
Well, thanks again. We'll be hearing from you, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But other than that, the news is all good, so thank you.
Trying to, looks like there was 6 million requested for DOT.
Just went up $1,000 based on what we have going on now.
Right, I'm saying, it's like that's, and it's just the next, I mean, that's
They're on a fixed income.
a lot. I mean, I realize not everyone has a.
Okay, do you all need a quick break?
But if the funding,
You can use the bathroom.
Okay.
the funding goes away, what are our options?
Right, well, that's the thing, I mean, it kind of stops it.
Fun stuff.
Like things are disappearing from my.
We're not talking taxes, we're talking trails. Okay.
We're gonna talk trails.
Goes in these threads.
Guys ready?
Yes. we're
Okay.
Ready.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with us tonight. We are, I'm gonna come over here.
You may want to introduce
Yeah.
yourselves.
I have brought Star Jamison, she's our Parks and Trails Manager, and Ann Martins, as you know, Public Works Director. I am Andy Warline, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Trails. So,
Good, thank you, Andy.
yeah, absolutely. So we're going to give you a quick overview of what Star and her team did this summer, and let you ask some questions if need be, and just kind of toot our horn a little bit on you know, the projects that were done, and you know, and all the maintenance and all the good stuff that the Parks and Trails team did this summer. Not only with Ann and Star and her team working on the paved trails and getting that going, and the assessments and planning for the future for those paved trails. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I'm going to turn it over to Star, and I'm just going to turn the page here and answer any questions if need be. And then at the end, Ann and I can tag team on the GIS update that the town is working on with easements and that type of stuff. Okay?
Okay, Star, good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Thank you for letting me come and have the opportunity to boast on the successful summer that I thought we had with the Parks and Trails Department. This being my second summer, I had a winter to actually plan, which was a benefit for me for sure. And I felt that, you know, with that winter, I was able to plan a productive season. So the goals that I had for the summer came from just what I was able to observe from the previous year, input from the staff and the community, poster board, and our poster plan. So I started off the summer with educating our staff. I hosted and provided a advanced trail building school, teaching drainage techniques and practices, educating the public with the Snowmass Sun, and Eric is here, and we worked together to do our trails talks, volunteer programs, and social media, maintaining existing trails. It was brought to our attention through the poster board that we maintain our existing trails before spending money to build new trails, money and time. Building out the west side loops, creating that new system, connecting with the connector trail and the village bound, and the new Discovery climbing trail.
Star, excuse me, where does this West Side Loop start? Where does one who's riding it pick it up?
Could I get to that in the further one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I have a map in here that all of these goals I'll get into a little bit more detail
Thanks.
about that. Continue to work with our code enforcement, work through trail conflicts for better management on our trails, continue to work closely with our event staff, just creating the non-controversial process between just the events and all the people that we bring with the regular users of our trails. Also, parking improvements for our Tom Blake Trail as it was identified in the poster plan. So the first one I was going into is just a little bit about our advanced trail building. Like I said, I planned it with IMBA and hosted it right here in the council chambers. We had 1 day of in-class training, and then we did a day of on-trail building for everyone. We identified problems, learned new techniques that I wanted our staff to be able to go out on the trails and start identifying our problems that we had. And then not only was that, we had a collaboration. I invited in the Forest Service, Pitkin County, and Crested Butte, and they all came, and we all got to work together on the trails on Saturday, which was really fun, and the Roaring Fork mountain bike. This is Joey Klein from IMBA. He and I went out and we looked at the nature trail. We picked a trail that we knew needed a lot of work, and a lot of people were interested in doing rock armoring. This rock work to eliminate a lot of the muddy sections that we had in that area and create a more sustainable trail. So this was the trail crew. Pam, Christian, Brandon, Jason Troxel was new this summer, and myself. So the summer, there's our list of the work that we did this summer. Was pretty much on all trails. Brandon mentioned to me how much weight he lost this summer. So we had 5 trail employees maintaining trails from March through the end of October. Next summer's efforts, where we can focus on Viewline, Deadline, Discovery, Village Bound, Ditch Trail, Anaerobic Nightmare, Starks Powerline, Sequel, and Government West. And to the right here is all of our days that we spent on each of the trails, in a total maintenance days of 233 in that time frame. So we just have some examples of things, if you guys get out on the trails, that you would see that some of the work that they did, and that's South Rim and North Rim examples there, and they're just trying to get the water off the trail so we don't have large ruts. Berms and turns, and so that's, we've got Highline, and then we've got Starks and South Rim, and then working on just more sustainable trail building. Here was a before and after shot of the North Rim, just some work that they did up there. The before here and the drainage, and over here and thereafter. This is our armored. You guys have been out on the ditch trail. That's it on the left. That's been a consistent muddy spot, which is no longer muddy. The crew did this, and then some other work on the nature trail. Here again, another portion of the nature trail they worked on this summer. Ridges, Tom Blake Ridge section. We have a new bridge there, and we have a new armored rock section in that area by Hidden Lane. That's new fence railing by Daly Lane Townhomes, or Daly Townhomes. And then the other side was Starks. They reconstructed the bridge on Starks.
Oh, good.
This was our town cleanup day. I think there are approximately 10 volunteers on this project. I wanted to get, instead of just doing town cleanup, I wanted to have a project that people could really get involved in. A lot of people had called me about this area. It's a pretty bad drainage off of the parking area there, so I wanted to construct a wall there, and we had the materials laying around at the rec center. This is our trail talks. This was for public outreach and education. Tool to reduce the conflicts, get a lot of education out there about trash, about muddy trails, wildlife on our trails, weeds. So I thought this was a very effective tool. I got a lot of compliments from people saying that they enjoyed that, and glad that we acknowledged some of these things.
How many people came, like on average,
to
these things?
Oh, these are in the paper. This is
They're
the
only
Snowmass.
in the paper.
Yeah,
So you
this
couldn't
is-
come to anything.
It's in the Aspen Daily and online, and then the Snowmass Sun.
Okay.
These are. It was a biweekly column that I did. Lori and Tina provided. They provide an annual patrol log, and this was their final totals here for the season. So I wanted to just include that in. They also do a comparison study that's they have in an additional to this spreadsheet. So now to your question. So another project I worked on started actually last fall with tourism, and this was creating a beginner intermediate climbing trail, climbing only for mountain bikes. Hikers can hike and descend. and it would connect eventually the village, the mall, to, it goes up and connects to the campground connector trail. So we worked with SkiCo previously, before I came on, the year before, and then the last 3 years to develop a trail system on the west side that's more cross-country oriented and not as much downhill, or get people introduced to the sport before they feel comfortable maybe getting on the lifts. Wrote a RFP. We hired Tony Boone for the Discovery Trail and Village Bound reroutes. Were progressive trail building. I helped each contractor with the layout and design, and we had a lot of restrictions within just that boundary of SkiCo's property. We worked with SkiCo. SkiCo provided us the signage. We did the sign installation. We created a trailhead with a little picnic table there so people could see the beginning of this trail. It has a map laying out on it. And then we are starting right now to develop a plan for interpretive kiosks that will be along the Discovery Trail, which will highlight the Discovery Center. And I'm working with the Discovery Center on the content of those, and then we'll purchase the kiosks to place them in 3 locations. If you want to move
That
on.
answer your question, Bob?
No.
Move to the next one. It's the, right there it is.
I tried to figure it out from this map, but I was unsuccessful.
So there was we have since pulled it for the winter, but there is, at the intersection where you see the trailhead sign, just on the right lower side of that, where the green and the blue come together, that's where it was.
It starts right above the concert venue. If you go up the
Right
grass,
above.
Oh, right above the concert,
100 yards above the grass.
on
is where the trail
Fanny
is.
Hill.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's this same ski trail, the Village Bound ski trail, is it the same?
Village Bound was just rerouted. We brought it around, actually on the other side of the road. Go ahead. And left is the new Village Bound, and the right's hard to see there, but.
And they're both considered beginner intermediate?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So one is the idea that you do the Discovery going uphill and then come back down to Village Bound?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of families up on the mountain, and they get lost, before these trails existed, and they're pushing their bikes up the road, and it's really nice now. A lot of people that have worked up at SkiCo have mentioned, how many people they saw. We used our mountain biking summer programs. Were up there a lot. It was great for beginners, and then I had a lot of compliments from people. That said, I don't mountain bike a lot, but, I got out on that trail and it was amazing to have it's nice and wide, no exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it creates a good loop for beginners.
So when you talk about the West Side Trail, it's really up Discovery and coming back down Village Bound.
And the campground.
Okay. But when you talk about the village or the West Side Loop, or you call them loops?
West Side Trails.
Okay.
And so I would consider those 3.
Okay.
They'll all give the option for beginner and intermediate.
Okay. One thing that I noticed is because they're both marked green circles, right?
Which is going to change.
Okay.
SkiCo is they're moving to a signage program that's more like ours and consistent with ours. So they're asking actually for our input on that and they're going to change the rating on those.
And what will they change them to?
I think they've put Village Bound as beginner and they're going to put it intermediate.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea just because if you're going up for the first time and you have 2, beginner trails essentially, and you can pick which one you want to go up,
Mm-hmm.
and you end up going up Village Bound, you're really probably supposed to be on the Discovery Trail. So if one's just rated higher, it's going to kind of point people towards the other trail.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, they're going to work on a signage plan and work with us, and we'll figure that out this winter.
We're looking at making it kind of seamless.
Mm-hmm.
So, people don't know right now what is town trails versus SkiCo trails anyways, but
Right.
they shouldn't have to know. It should just be the whole experience.
And how are we
Signs will
doing
help.
getting the connection from the top of the concert venue down to the mall?
So we're working on that. There's 3 properties that, and we will touch a little bit on this in our GIS discussion, but what we're doing in GIS is trying to determine where where our current trails are and if there is an easement that exists. In this particular area, trail exists, no easement exists for this particular trail. So we will work with those homeowners and that piece of property. And if you can imagine the bottom half of that, above the concert venue, it goes out into Ski-Co property and out into Wood Run 5 property, and then comes back through 2 other property owners to cross the concert venue into the mall area. So lots of stuff, lots of moving parts, but that's one of the things that we're working on.
Great.
That's why that Star and her team put that picnic table there, so people, kind of knew that it was, hey, where is this trail? And it's the starting point, so I think bringing it down a little lower is only gonna help, but, really, I'm not sure many people knew that, that trail didn't start, right there at the mall or, just below the concert venue.
Yeah, that table is a good landmark for people to say, that we're renting bikes or whatever.
Right.
Look for the orange picnic table. I got one of the brightest colors for that. So as I was mentioning before, the Discovery Trail will soon have these kiosks by next year. I picked out 3 locations. It was designed into the trail, and a lot of it have really nice views of the Ziegler Pond. Paved trails. This spring, Public Works and I, we created a trails assessment on all of our paved trails. It was basically just an inventory of our trails, gave them ratings, and determined a priority list to move forward with our paved trails. And this year, mostly to Anne, completed 3,389 linear feet approximately. of
I
new
did not hear what that
of
number.
new pavement on Brush
My
Creek
number.
and Owl Creek paths this year. And I started a regular and preventative maintenance program for our recreation paths, which include drainage, corridor clearing, patching, shouldering, and bridge improvements. And this is the Brush Creek Trail, Owl Creek Trail over by Fairway 3. These are some of our patching projects. Tom Blake's parking. Public Works helped install these wayfinding signs that we ordered and reoriented. I tried this out by just moving the parking area. It's kind of hard to see. It's on your left, but I moved parking signs over to your left to allow for 14 spaces. I measured out on this side versus just 5 cars pulling right in. So now allowing for more parking, and then people can park behind or trailers can turn. So for next year, just looking and going through our poster plan and some ideas that we're having is the bike park and skills trail at the recreation center, community garden, which is actually top of our list, continuing with the corridor clearing signage on the view line, an equestrian connection, and it's kind of a safety connection off of Low Line to the Owl Creek Rec Path. Mountain View to Rim Trail, and Nature Trail Lot 7 to Sleigh Ride. And all of these were identified with different names, and so I've listed those at the end here. Repave recreation paths, and we'll just keep chipping away at that and continue trail maintenance. I've been working with the Forest Service with a cost share agreement, and we just keep track of our time that we work with on their trails, and then that comes back to us, and we agree on a price basically for that. And the other thing I've been working with them on is the East Snowmass Bridge, and they're actually moving forward with that as well.
Really?
Really, the one
That's
over
good.
here on the ditch?
On the
And
creek,
we're-
huh?
Mm-hmm.
Finally.
What does that mean that they're actually moving forward?
They're moving forward and we're helping them.
Ah,
Heard the page on the
Oh, yeah.
proposal.
Expect construction anytime soon
What's that?
on that
No,
bridge you're
we have found that the wilderness boundary was possibly moved from a lot of, the wilderness boundary on a lot of maps that I have seen isn't on our side.
Oh.
And we just looked at it and the wilderness boundary is actually on our side, which creates an entirely new process for how that's built, you know, with not allowing chainsaws and certain things. And so with that information being found, then now we are, I was told we're moving forward. They're looking at it and now trying to figure out a proper design for it, now knowing that it's in wilderness.
So it helps to know what materials can be used and how it can be built in order, okay.
And they, their next moves are basically moving the wilderness signs. Because I asked that, I said, well, your wilderness signs are on the other side. So their next move is like bringing the proper signage over to actually where the wilderness boundary is. So that'll educate people to understand that.
When you say the other side of Snowmass?
Our side.
East Snowmass Creek?
Our side.
And so is it more difficult to build in the wilderness than it is?
There are more restrictions.
But to get the approval, is it gonna be harder in the wilderness area?
I'm not sure. I'll have to, we're still working on that. We just had a meeting this week, last week.
Well, I'm glad
on
to hear
this.
that there's a communication process that now seems to be operating.
Yeah.
So that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, it's, I think both of us are excited to move forward with this.
I'm sure the community would be very happy.
Very happy, yeah.
Good work.
So the last part we want to talk about was just an update on what we're working on as far as the GIS on trails. We've been working with the consultant GTG on the easements, and basically they have been helping us with identifying some of the language on the plats. But what we found is, as we dig through this, is additional layers that we need to work on, meaning the terminology that's on those plats. And also, a lot of the plats reference other book and pages of documents that we haven't yet had a chance to scan or take a look at what that language is on there. So the image over here, it's a little dark. It shows the trails that do not have an easement mapped. If you look at those, it's a little bit hard to see, but the right-hand side there is the purple, and then on down further is the green and pink. They're not as much concerned because they're in-town property. So that's one of the things we're overlaying what the property type is, if we need an easement even. But then there's areas that there are not easements and that we're tackling on, is it just that we don't have the documentation yet? Or is there actually not an easement? And then we have to go through the process of, trying to acquire those easements. So, a couple things is also that we're working on training internally so that we don't get stuck at the point of, as we continue to build, and we build things that do have easements, like Project STARS just got done with, that we're making sure that we're importing that information into our GIS system so that we have all that background data. So it's a complicated project.
A couple of questions
Sure.
about these easements. Have we determined that there are any trails where there are not easements and or there are easements that don't eliminate no motorized vehicles, or don't?
So I'm going to break your question down into two parts.
Yep.
One is that we believe there are some trails without easements. And so before we list that out, we want to dive into them a little bit further, make sure we've done our due diligence on that. The second part is, I'll let Andy talk a little bit more on, we have gone through and also looked at the information that we do have, the documentation we have and the language that we have, and what that says. And so basically, we have broken down the layers to look at the restrictions on them. And there are restrictions on the motorized vehicles, But before we give a full report, we need to finish this analysis of the
I
documentation.
understand. Coming back to the new trail, or the new trails to be built, with potential easements, are those easements, will those easements be written to restrict motorized vehicles?
We already have the easements for anything. So here's our philosophy, just so you know, and this is why it sometimes takes a little bit of time, but now we're catching up, is that, as you recall, Fairway 3, that trail was not built within the easement. So it took us a while to get the easement, but then once we had that, and Owl Creek Trail, I should not call it Fairway 3. That got rectified, and then we're able to reconstruct and do that. So whenever we go to do a construction project, that is the effort we go through, is to make sure the trail is within the easement prior to going to construction. So that's why we're all working together on this. It's kind of mutual. Some of them are dirt trails, and some of them are the paved trails. And so collectively, it's all the same effort of looking at the easements and where they sit and the construction standards. But we may tackle projects differently. So I'm handling more of the.
But I think my question really,
Yep.
it relates to either situation, the Fairway 3 situation, or the situation that Star was talking about on Fanny Hill, where there's a trail but no easements. So we are trying to establish easements or the proper easements. When we do that, are we including this phrase, no motorized vehicles, in those easements?
I don't believe so. I don't think we're restricting it, that we're looking at it as more of coming, and I may be corrected, but as a policy discussion on that. We're not trying to have that easement language within the
Okay.
easements.
That's what I was trying to get
To
at.
be clear, Jen, I mean, it's the underlying property owner's decision at that point.
I
on how to
understand.
grant that, and
Right.
what we found is the majority of the easements been granted to us so far have that provision, and so I can, just some of the history on this connection between the top of the concert venue to the bottom. When we talked about trying to get that easement continued to the mall, which we couldn't get done for lots of reasons, we did propose to them to keep that language the same. We thought that would be a selling point, that our pitch was going to be, there's no difference between this part and this part, can we please have this additional easement? That existing easement said no motorized. So I think my short answer would be it's gonna depend based on a case by case, on existing, underlying, what are we trying to connect to? We don't wanna allow motorized on one trail where it connects to something where there's, motorized, or not, we don't wanna have inconsistent requirements.
Yeah, I kind of understand that, but on the other hand, where we're negotiating new easements, I guess my preference, again, would be that we don't specifically offer, the exemption for motorized vehicles. If the homeowner, if the homeowner brings it up, that's another story. But that the town doesn't offer that representation.
Well, I think transparency is really important. John, what do you, don't give them the option?
No, you're giving them the option. You just have
However
to.
you want to negotiate.
But
Both
Counselor,
ways are legal.
Counselor, your if I understand, really what we're trying to make sure is that we've got flexibility for electric bikes.
Yes.
It's not all motorized, it's the electric
Yes.
bikes you're trying to make
It's
provision.
totally the electric bike
So
issue.
just, and I think I understand that, but when you say motorized, I think
Well, because that's the
I
word, that's the
understand.
wording in the easement that
Correct.
creates
the
the
trouble.
difficulty
Yeah.
for electric bikes,
Yeah.
as it currently defined.
Correct.
Yeah.
When we negotiate through your yard, we'll make sure it's a motorized easement.
I'm happy with electric bike through my
No,
yard.
I didn't say that. I said
No.
motorized. I
Okay.
think you'll get a lot further if you limit it to
Electric bikes.
the definition that was recently adopted of what an e-bike is,
That's,
rather than motorized. Because when you come to go through my yard with a trail and you say motorized, I'm gonna think dirt bikes, quad runners, and all that stuff, and I'm gonna say, take a hike. But if you say we're gonna limit it to these three classes, actually, we're only gonna do
Two
one and
classes.
two.
We need to
you
be,
might get further.
Yeah, I agree with that, John. I think you're right.
I think that's really what you're trying to promote.
Mm-hmm.
You're using, which is the problem that I personally have with the statute, is the statute defined a bike, but it still has a motor. And the old language, the distinguish was, no motorized, yeah, you're fine to go over my property. Motorized, you're not. And now we're carving out something different.
Something different.
And I don't know that it's different. I think it's still a motor regardless, but it's not
Doesn't make
a
noise.
two-cycle motor with
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
not,
it's
it's
certain
not
kind of-
gas powered.
It doesn't make any noise, and it's not gas powered.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
well, our staff who's negotiating needs to have an answer from the town, which way are we going to try to get these easements? And I would hope that if we would be kind enough to talk about what are we talking about here. Because unfortunately, some of the owners may not understand the legalese of an easement.
You know, and just so you guys understand, and I'm sure that you do, there's quite a few different easements out there. There's
Right.
winter easement, there's summer easement, and, you know, and almost classifications inside each one of those of what is a restriction and what is not. In the winter, there may not be a motorized restriction because of ski equipment, you know, ski trail maintenance, snowmobile, you know, cat and all of that. So sifting through all of those easements it has been quite a job on trying to figure out which ones go where. And how we started in high level was basically we asked GTG, give us the everywhere where there's a restriction. Well, they gave us a map that had, you know, restrictions all over the town. And then we said, well, okay, wait a minute, let's ask that again. Can you give us restrictions on motorized vehicles? And they said, okay, we had to pare it down a lot, and we're still in the process of paring it down into, okay, let's look at recreation easements. Let's look at, you know, that are only summer, or let's look at that are only winter. What can we do with those? What are the missing pieces, and then how do we get to that point, you know, to put those together? So lots of easements are still out there that, you know, that are utility easements that have that don't really have a restriction, but they may not be something that we as the town can use to build a trail on, or they are restricted in some way that, so it'll be a lot of work with different agencies and, you know, making sure that if a trail goes through there and it has gone through there and, you know, for years, let's make sure that that easement is secured and that it's written the way that, you know, the town needs it written, and it's going to benefit everybody.
Sounds like a pretty complicated process.
Yeah, it does.
It's fun.
We thought it was gonna be real easy.
No, there's like 35 different classifications of easements and not the same language. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. I mean, you'll have.
So we don't expect the outcome anytime soon.
Is
It's on our, we're chipping away at it,
Yeah.
so,
is this an opportunity to try to standardize
yes,
language for the various types of restrictions?
yes. But,
Is that not a good idea, John, or?
Oh, no, I didn't say it wasn't a good idea. I don't.
It's standardizing and going forward for
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
But going back, it is what it is at this point.
Right.
Oh, I see,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
it's setting up our process to march forward so that if we have, you know, something comes in, we're gonna call it XYZ.
Okay.
And the reality is, we probably won't be building, you know, a ton of new trails, you know, miles and miles of new trails, but getting those existing trails in their proper easement alignments and making sure that, you know, that we know what restrictions are on those, you know, summer and winter, I think is the most important thing that we're going to get out of that. It's going to give us a lot of insight on what we can do into the future, and, you know, some of that may not change. I mean, that's the reality of the, you know, there are some of those old-time easements that probably wouldn't be changed, but if a connection was to be made to that trail, then we need to be prepared on what we can offer on that trail when we build those. So, hope that made sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, before you need to do your inventory and determine every type and every use. And then you can come up with a plan using existing trails, or maybe trying to change certain linkages which will make continuing trail accessible to what you're trying to do, the e-bike scene. And that might not be as difficult as trying to overlay all of it and say, we're gonna do it like this. Because there will be certain property owners that are gonna just say, no. It's gonna be like this, that's the way it has been. But once you know that, then you can formulate how you want that use to interface across the existing trails and easements.
Got it. Star, I have just a question to go back a minute on paved trails. Do we have or do we need a reserve fund for paved trail maintenance or improvements? Is it?
You don't have one, and sure, we take one, but what we do right now is we plant, with the poster plan adoption, I don't know if it's the top priority, but certainly one of the top priorities was to improve the assets we've already got before we build more. And so it was 2 years ago, 2 budgets ago was the first time that we actually allocated dollars to go back. First time in a long time, we allocated dollars. And so we don't have a reserve fund, but we've got it as a priority in budgeting.
Okay, so it's allocated in the budget, but outside of a reserve fund.
It's a discretionary expenditure by you all through the budget process.
It's in the CIP projects. So we haven't identified those projects. It's been a work in progress on the paved trail assessment. And, you know, a couple things to talk about that is paved trails are always expensive to reconstruct, and they're to the point where they do need to be reconstructed. They've been overlaid several times. They're like, you know, sometimes 7 inches thick, and you can't just add more asphalt on top of it because you start getting into drainage issues. The fall-offs are a lot, so they really need to be reconstructed, a majority of them. So your dollars don't go as far as if it was just an easy overlay project. I mean, we're gonna start getting into that same conversation on roads soon here as well, because they've been overlaid so many years and not reconstructed. So one of the things we've been working on is the pavement assessment, so it kind of lays out the priority of the conditions of the pavement, but also it looks at, are they major connectors, are they the major corridors, you know, kind of ranks them out that way. And then we look at our funding, and we're gonna start working on now is based on what we've been seeing as far as our construction costs coming in, is then we can do basically an estimate on how many feet or linear feet we can get done on a reconstruction and how long it's gonna take us. And then we can have that conversation later on what we should be setting aside for each year in the future. But we're still in that kind of that assessment mode. It's not like we're dead in the water, we're doing projects, but we probably have a bigger scope picture in the future.
And we're, I mean, in all honesty, we're behind the 8 ball and we're catching up.
Yep.
So I mean,
Right.
we're gonna be spending money on them for a while.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I got a few questions. On your future improvement projects, equestrian safety connection, low line to Owl Creek. Can you just tell me about that one?
Just the possibility of moving that so it doesn't drop you right down onto the Highline Road. Highline and
So you know where the
LN.
intersection is. there.
To
It
come
just
out right at the
drops you off
roundabout
right
there.
And people come in hot, and it's just, I just am looking at a different alignment for that.
So to put people like further down towards
Further
the
down,
ditch line,
connect
or?
with Highline, possibly farther down.
Right, okay.
But it's not at the roundabout, it's on the other end. It's on the uphill side they're talking about.
Yeah.
So they're climbing up to go Owl Creek Road over.
Yeah.
So Owl Creek and Highline.
Oh,
where-
right, okay.
Where low line basically dead ends at the road, there's a little rock wall there.
It just drops you
The
right
idea
down.
would be to either extend that up further, which would get you, if an equestrian was using it, our thought would be that they would be going to Tom Blake or the National Forest anyway, so they need to not be dumped out onto Owl Creek Road on
Right.
that hill.
Right.
And basically give them a.
Yeah, I mean, I've
That's
seen
bad.
some
Yeah.
mountain bikers coming out of there, and it's potentially, it's more dangerous from the down, you know, from a vehicle coming downhill, but it's pretty, even coming uphill, you're never quite sure how far out into the roadway they're gonna end up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. And then the Nature Trail Lot 7 sleigh ride. So is that a different trail? So it's in addition to the nature trail?
Mhm.
And so is the idea to make a bike trail
Mhm.
that kind of mirrors the nature trail?
Yeah, that would be above the nature trail. Mhm.
Because the nature trail is pretty amazing. I mean, the work you guys did there is phenomenal. I mean, it's a great bike trail. Is the preference to make it a bike trail or to make a hiking trail?
It would of course be both, but just another opportunity.
Another trail.
Just to disperse use
Mm-hmm.
in that area, considering we have hikes in there and bikes aren't allowed
Right.
at a certain time. So that would just be another way for people to get up to the sleigh ride and not have that and just disperse the use. Kind
Right.
of like Seven Star. We didn't hear much about North Rim being a problem this year because we have another trail. So
Right.
just having that other trail option allows for dispersed use and not so much
Yeah, I
in trail
totally agree with you.
conflicts.
And the
Yeah.
beauty is it's town-owned property, so it's one of those things that we can look at right away, and, you know, that could actually make it jump up the list if the money was available to build that trail, and if the staff could do it.
Yeah, we had IMBA, actually, Joey Klein came out and he designed a trail there. I have it in GIS, and so we have it actually already designed because it was another option for a climbing trail out of the mall. So it's already designed. You know, we're training the crews, and I want to start volunteer projects next year. So I thought this would be, it's a fairly short section. It would be a nice trail to construct. It's on our land, and I've already talked to the Aspen Valley Land Trust about it as well.
Because the poster plan has identified it, right, is to eliminate the requirements as to when you can and can't ride there?
Correct, on the nature trail,
Right.
yes.
And when do you plan on putting that into place? Or would this trail skip that process?
We've talked about it several times, Star and I, in the last couple of years, and we don't have a date to tell you when we would do that. We wanted to make the adjustments and the repairs on the nature trail and kind of study it and see how much usage we're actually getting with that. Working with the Discovery, with ACES and tourism, trying to decide, would that be the best idea to either keep that restriction in place or to work with them on maybe some signage and, you know, maybe widening the trail and that type of stuff. So I know that was a long roundabout question or answer to get to. We don't have an answer for that yet. We're still looking into all of the options and making sure that, you know, we're looking at all the users when we're looking at that specific trail. So that's why those signs haven't come down. So we've had that discussion.
Right.
As it is now, it would be dangerous. I spent a lot of time out there this summer, and there are a lot of people who hike up that trail. So it would be a lot of work with the tourism and figuring out with ACES, because it would be a very dangerous situation. We'd be putting people in coming down the nature trail with all the hikers that come up. We really got to see the use out there this summer.
Right.
And there are a lot of hikers.
So the better option is to put another trail in.
It would, you know, to allow people to know the time frame that they are going to encounter a bike, I think is good. That education piece. And then, yes, possibly just dispersing the use would also allow that. So.
Okay.
Okay, guys, it's 6:05.
All right, just had a couple more questions.
Hurry up, or else we won't get to the next agenda item.
There was a trail that was put in, the sequel extension, illegally, and it was buried. Have you guys looked at, getting in, I think there actually is an easement for that trail, right? The old ditch that continues over to the, anaerobic, from sequel to anaerobic?
That is all Forest Service. They did the investigation and all of that. And I know, having worked for the Forest Service, a lot of times when they find illegal trails, like, it's not the best idea to then turn them over into allowing them.
But it was a trail, and then I think it was approved as an equestrian trail originally.
Don't think it was ever approved. I know that was one of the ideas, you know, when Ted O'Brien worked for us. That was one of the equestrian loops that he talked about with the Forest Service, you know, and But we know that it was never, I think it was on their radar, let's say that, but it was never approved as, yes, this will be on their list and they're going to make it happen.
So, going back to the idea of, spreading people out, is that a trail that we want to pursue to try to spread people out?
I don't have faith that they would.
It would be
It was a decommissioned trail. They went in and did investigation, had their law enforcement officers come in, and it was a decommissioned trail via someone illegally trail building on U.S. Forest Service land. That's illegal. And so, I mean, talking to them is a possibility for that. But a non-existing trail, they would have to go through the NEPA process for that.
Okay. And then just going back to kind of that first mile, last mile that we always talk about with transportation. I know we've talked about the Tom Blake Trail and trying to eliminate some of those interactions early on. The equestrian trail, it says equestrians only. We're really discouraging hikers to take that trail. What do we need to do to encourage hikers to take those signs down?
I think we did change those, didn't we?
I don't think it's on our list. I know that that's one of the things that we're gonna order those signs and call it the Tom Blake Equestrian / hiking trail or something to that, and change those all along the way.
Okay, are you putting, with no dogs? Because a dog interaction with a horse can be just brutal. So then it'd have to have no dogs on it.
I think we put dogs on leash. We did something with those trails. I can't remember.
Dogs on leash doesn't do it. They can go pretty berserkle.
But they can take a dog, if the equestrians have a horse, they can take their dog off leash.
Right.
They shouldn't. I mean, the rule would be, even if they're on an equestrian, if they're on a horse, they have to have their dog on leash. And we know that some of those
That doesn't
are not
work.
doing it.
That doesn't work.
But the general idea of getting more hikers on the equestrian trail is something we're absolutely aiming towards, and signage we know has been has influenced it otherwise. And so we know that signage needs to be modified.
So here goes. I'm just an avid hiker, not so much a biker. So now you want me to get on a horse trail with my dogs on leash, and what do I run into is horse doo-doo.
No, I don't think it's a restriction. If you go over to that Tom Blake parking
Yeah.
lot, and Andy and I went and did it this
Yeah.
fall, the signs say equestrians only. And so it's almost like hikers prohibited, if you just read the signage kind of clearly like that. So we're trying to say, you can hike here, you can hike on the traditional Tom Blake Trail. Both trails are open to hiking. But the signage
Just be careful
really
with
kind of
dogs.
looks just towards equestrians. We're trying to make sure that hikers know they can go either way.
And honestly, it's a great hike. I mean,
It
if you
is.
guys
I've
have
done it.
Done that particular.
Right.
From the parking lot up the equestrian side, I mean, it's beautiful. And it gets you to the same spot that, you wanted to go on Tom Blake Trail.
But the signage, basically said equestrian only, and it's
Yes, it
not
does.
equestrian only, it's equestrian and hiking. It's no biking for sure, and it was just the terminology in the signs that we're looking at. We did that, well, it was a great fall day, I can tell you all about the
Yeah.
day.
And do we know how many horse trips we get on those equestrian trails?
When Tina and Lori do their, when they meet up with a horse, they do put it in their comments. And just glancing over this, I knew that there were several different areas where they said met with, two equestrian users, but not a lot. I guess to answer your question, I mean, we don't see a lot coming from there. Late summer, early summer, I think you would see a little bit more as soon as Tom Blake opens up. And, it's the access point to the National Forest, so that's where, they're trying to get to that point anyway. So, we can talk with Tina and Lori and see if they have any more data on that. They try to go out themselves and ride horses, so they can interact from that aspect as well.
We can also put a trail counter there too.
I think it would be interesting to know, because to the mayor's point, I mean, we're not seeing a lot of equestrian traffic on those trails, and it's a really, heavily utilized resource, so we should make sure that we're taking care of those people who are getting out there the most. And I think it would be easy to, even at some of those intersections where we're putting them both on the same trail, to just, do a little connection so that, we just avoid those interactions.
And as you guys know, the Tom Blake Trail and the equestrian trail are, they're in such a tight space. When we get back to our equestrian conversation, that the homeowners there and the private landowners, and it is running through a very tight space that is geographically challenging as well. So we're trying to put as many users on that, and that trail does share, they both share a trail on several instances, and looking at that specific area, we've talked about putting a fence down the middle and, basically, segregating them from one side to the other, but it's a spaghetti in there. So lots of things we can do. We can look into that more, and that's definitely one of our biggest priorities, is that Tom Blake Trail and those areas and the interaction that we do get on that. So.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And also South Rim, I mean, that's probably the most heavily utilized trail, and that's probably where you hear the most about bike-hiker interactions. So, providing another trail off of the South Rim, I think would be, and I think that's what you have labeled as Hawk Ridge, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that would come from basically the timbered part of Tom Blake across to.
We're not sure. That's easements
Yeah.
too. That's like looking into easements
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out easements through the HOAs, back here behind the town center.
Well, that one, if you think about, let's say the third turn on the South Rim as you're climbing up, if you could go basically out into that field and come around the top of Mountain View and end up back at the Mountain View Trail, so basically on the other side of this. It would allow for parking here and also access to that point, but then it would also allow, that bail-off point for bikers and or hikers coming, instead of South Rim, they could do Hawk Ridge or whatever it's going to be called at that time.
Right.
But then, as to Star's point, then it would be extending that trail along this way and hooking back up to South Rim at some point over, above
Hawk Ridge would be a shorter connection. It would just keep
Meadow
people
Road.
out of Mountain View parking lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's should be a really high priority. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, we need to bring this to a closure. Any other,
Thank you very much.
any other
Thanks for the
questions?
detailed
Call
report, it was
Andy.
really good.
Great work.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody.
For all your work, particularly on this easement stuff that we thought would be simple.
It's never simple when you go looking.
Okay, next item. Travis, what you got for us on this survey?
So, we are just picking up where we left off in September with a questionnaire
Okay.
for marijuana in Snowmass Village. Since we met last, we incorporated a lot more questions with greater detail on the topic. So we added some questions about the different types of licenses, as well as additional restrictions that could be placed on marijuana establishments. And we specifically wanted to talk about the anonymity of the survey. So as it is set up now, we are still requiring a name and address for each respondent to submit a questionnaire. We have determined that those would be subject to open records requests, so we couldn't guarantee anonymity with each response. We could, however, withhold names, obviously, during any public presentation of the results. And then, the alternative, of course, would be to make the survey 100% anonymous, so not require a name or address on each response. The downside to that is it kind of makes the questionnaire a little bit susceptible to invalid responses or kind of ballot stuffing, perhaps, from special interest groups.
I mean, do you think people would not do the survey just because they have to put their name?
mean, it's our recommendation, when we started this, we thought putting the name on, the idea was we wanted to avoid a public hearing kind of process where someone stood at the podium and said yes, and then the next person said no, and yes and no.
Right.
And give everybody the chance to write it down and give you a format to accept that. And so we kind of came up with a survey, so someone could just say yes or no and put their name on it, or they also had the opportunity to add a lot more information behind that, expanding on that. And then the discussion last time was, would putting their name on it dissuade somebody from actually filling it out? And the question you asked us was, could that be withheld? And I mean, speaking for John for a sec, I mean, that answer was not really, is what we've determined.
Open records.
And so we'd come back is, here's the survey and the options that Travis just laid out.
As far as I'm concerned, let people be knowing how they feel.
I think there's a stigma, in a social stigma to people who want or who support marijuana and marijuana licensing. I'm uncomfortable about, the anonymity issue, although I do think that it would be better to require names and addresses than to have it totally open. So with that in mind, is there another option for distributing this questionnaire where we can send it to people? We can specify who we send it to, so we know who we send it to, and yet we get a response from that person or persons that doesn't include a name or address, but we've controlled who it goes to.
Well, that's open records, isn't it?
Your record of who you sent it to is a public record.
Yes.
All right, but that's fine. You can, but there's anonymity there.
How so? I can go down to Picken County, get address, and cross-match with the name.
Yeah, you can do that.
Could do that.
So all you know is these are the people who filled out the survey. You don't, because their names are not on the survey.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You don't know how they filled out that survey. You only know that they did.
Yeah,
So-
but what stops that person from forwarding it to someone else?
Yes.
Well, I guess the way to do that is you give each, I mean, I've seen this before, okay, where you get a code number, you get a code, and you have to put that code in, and the code can only be used one time. So, I mean, I've seen that, I've gotten things, surveys and stuff, that have that kind of requirement.
Okay, so with open records, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I don't know the answer to this, so this
Okay, well, that's what
Okay.
we're trying to
If-
sort it out.
Yeah, so if you give me a code, a code has to be assigned by someone. And I don't know who someone would be.
I think the survey organization, whether it's Survey Monkey or, some certain, whoever that survey organization is.
I still think that's open to public records, isn't
Well,
it?
it can be, but, and I don't.
I think you're
me-
making this too
I mean,
complicated.
Me personally, I don't have any problem with who received this questionnaire. My problem is when we require people to put their name on the questionnaire that comes back to us, that's where the loss of anonymity comes in, not in, I received a questionnaire.
I'm fine with putting my name on something.
I mean, I feel like if you're that passionate about it, whether you're against it or for it, it's like,
So what?
I mean, we've already gotten a lot of letters from people. I mean, I guess my thought is if we put it out there and they had to put their name and the response isn't great, then we can look at doing something else. But I don't know. I mean, it's legal, so it's not like you're like putting your name on something that's like an illegal thing. I mean, the marijuana's legal, so I don't know. Just because you fill out the survey doesn't mean you smoke it.
That's exactly right.
It just means that you're passionate about either wanting it in this community or not. I don't know.
Travis, the surveys we did, you know, when we would go to football meetings, you know what I'm saying, that they would put together, you think about, I'm not sure where they came from, but they worked really well. Somebody could put, everybody was assigned a number. We had to get into that website by you know what I'm talking about, we were over in Gibson.
I don't know, are you talking about the ones that were like polls that are live, like with your phone, or are you talking
Yeah,
about?
right,
I
right.
don't
But
know
those
what
could
it's-
also be online.
Right.
Because I talked to Ryan afterwards about that. So besides the Survey Monkey that Bob was referring to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just pulled
That's
that
just
out.
one
No,
example.
that
That's just
seems
one
to be a
example.
very popular one.
Yeah.
Which is what this is on, and I don't know that we have the ability to assign like each person a code and send that out to each individual, since we're talking about a pretty grand scale.
Because we're also not just talking about residents. I mean, it's everybody who's visiting or, and, you know, or people that
Well-
work.
No,
No, it's everybody. So here's the difference, I think.
employees.
We have a list, right, or we have a series of lists with email addresses on them.
About 4,000, I think.
Okay, about 4,000. And that's what we were gonna use to send, to make to send this out, right?
Correct, yeah.
So,
Plus a newspaper, and
We were also considering sending out like a mailer to each PO box, which is a pretty easy thing to do since everyone has a
Okay.
PO box.
okay,
I tell you what, where I'm, okay. So you want to send something out, and I'm just going to mention one big hassle we had with people giving us input, and that was when we went through the whole Krablunik issue. There was all these petitions, and God and Country was, no, God didn't sign it. But it was everybody from all over the world, because it went from this to this to this to this, answer this. So you had people weighing in on Krablunik that may have never, ever been here. And so any type of, I think we need to try to kind of control where something like this happens. And as we all know, when we went through the statue outside, we went through it again with everybody doing Facebook. And one guy repeating 15 times out of Newcastle. So,
so we
yeah,
can,
John?
It appears to me that you all are tying yourselves in knots to avoid a couple hours of sitting here and listening to your constituents tell you. And if someone comes up that you don't recognize, you say, "Are you from Snowmass?" And when they say no, you say, "Thank you. Next." You sit there and you gather public opinion. If people don't want to show up because there's some stigma, that's their problem. If
Why don't we
people
just
are
send it out and
suppo-
get a name on it then?
Huh?
Why don't we just send out the survey with a name on it?
You can do that. It'll be public, but that's what you directed us to not do last time.
I wasn't here.
But
what if we just put,
you're cocking your eye. You don't like the idea of just public discourse? We're for it, we're against it? we're
No,
for it?
I think it's gonna happen regardless if we ask for it or not. I mean, I just think the survey covers a lot of the people that can't be here. Whether they're second homeowners, whether they're out of town when we are having this discussion. I think it's a good starting point.
I think it's great.
That's all. I mean, I don't think it's the end all be all. To me, it's just a starting
It's another tool.
Yeah, it's a gauge, that's it.
It's
You know,
another
and
quiver.
if people respond and 300 of those people live in Boulder or some other place, then we don't have to pay attention to those, and you just pay attention to the people that are here, have second homeowners. I mean, I think it's just another tool.
It's another tool to gauge.
yeah, I think we'll learn a lot sending it out there. I think the survey is excellent. I think you did a good job with
It's
it.
excellent.
What I would add is in the intro, if we just said, you know, your name is not gonna be made public, but would be subject to a
Open record.
open records.
Good point.
I mean,
Will
that's,
not be made public at a meeting.
right.
Right. I
Like,
mean,
we're not
'cause
gonna
it is public.
publicize who said what, but if someone wanted to dig into it and find a bunch, you know,
But
find their
if
names.
you're gonna go through them in a meeting, you wanna see that people's names on the bottom of? If you wanna see it in a packet, I mean, you're gonna see Joe Smith's name at the bottom of their survey, and it's gonna be in your packet saying Joe Smith.
Are we gonna go through 4,000 surveys here?
I mean,
Also-
what I would assume will happen at some point is you'll get 300 responses, and you'll have them in a packet, and you'll have all those responses, we'll have them summarized, and we'll have, you know, some kind of cover sheet on top of that saying, here's the responses, and here's all the surveys behind it, and you guys can give us direction one way or the other with
mean,
that input.
Would we want all the individual surveys, or would it be sufficient for
No.
staff to collate them and
Okay.
provide,
just give us the
and
numbers.
provide the
Give us-
statistical
yeah,
information?
Give us a directional signal. That's, I think, what most of us
Okay.
are looking for. Then that will
Just like,
advise us as to public sessions and a variety of other tools we'll have.
yeah. And also, I think it's when we do the community survey, how you kind of clump all the comments
Right.
together per answer. Like, that's great, because then you start to see common themes. I think it's easier for me to look at that way.
Right.
I agree. I mean, if we offer that, well, we offer that.
Yep.
If we're into the actual survey, item number 1, in parentheses, I think what we are asking is whether marijuana licenses should be legalized in Snowmass Village, because, because that's really what we're asking. We're asking what we're eventually gonna do if we allow marijuana in Snowmass Village, we would have to license the use of that, right? We would have to create the license.
Yeah, I don't understand the parentheses thing. It was like confusing to me. I must have read the question like 10 times. I mean, because in my mind, I'm like, are you saying that sales isn't the same as cultivation and testing?
Yeah, well,
I mean,
that's, sales it should be licensed, because that's what
right.
we're doing.
I mean, you
I
just,
think
and
that's
you
a
get
good
rid of
point.
that. That was confusing.
Okay,
But that was the only one that was good.
And-
So good job.
You have another one?
yeah, well, yeah, because it's,
We're still going.
Yeah,
in-
circus is taking over the road.
I do want to say, I mean, upon approval, we will go into kind of a
Yeah,
test
yeah,
mode and
okay.
read it before we
in,
do that.
in number 2, in question number 2, we have the same thing. Marijuana establishments should be licensed, not allowed, but licensed in Snowmass Village. And then all the different, options.
Those are two different things. The contemplation of allowed or licensed is two different things. You have to allow them before they can get licensed.
Allowed to be licensed.
Allowed to be licensed, how about
It's very
allowed to
wordy.
operate?
Should TOSV license marijuana industry in retail
Okay.
sales, manufacturing, cultivation,
Okay, that's
testing?
clear. Thank you.
Did you get that?
No.
Number 2, we're on number
That
2?
would work for question number 1.
I think that's 1 and 2 combined.
Yeah. I
It
think
is.
It is 1 and 2 combined.
Yeah, okay.
So we're combining 1 and 2?
No, but you still need the person to be able to say yes or no.
Yes.
But
Because-
to each one, there'd be a yes or no.
I know, but, oh, I see what you're saying.
Should TOSV license marijuana
Got it.
as retail sales, yes or no? B, manufacturing, yes or no?
Then that's fine.
Cultivation, yes or no?
Right.
Yeah, then that makes sense.
Yes or no?
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay, so, question 3.
Wait,
What-
so is there consensus to change?
Yes.
Combine 1 and 2, so we won't have an overarching yes or no.
No, that's
question.
not, I don't think,
Uh,
you guys,
You know, Maybe we should have an overarching, because then you should be able to skip some questions. If I put no, I don't want to answer, then why would you answer the next question?
Well, you wouldn't
how it's
answer
set up
2 or
now.
3.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, you might answer 3.
No, because if you're saying you don't want it, then why would you want restrictions?
exactly.
Well, you might not want it, but if
Well, that's
it
true.
happened, you might want to have restrictions.
Right, but then maybe they need their own question. Like for that person. Because if I saw that and said, what types of additional restrictions, I'd be like, but I didn't want it in the first place. You might have to have a
But
specific
there-
question
it
that's
does say
specific
none
to
of
that
the
person.
above.
Well, it does say none of the above.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people think when you check, like, no, you're done with the questionnaire.
Right.
Yeah, but you can elaborate on your selection, you can, or your
Maybe it's
preference.
none of your damn business.
Well, then you don't have to elaborate. But I think I think you should give people, you should give people the opportunity to think about not just not just the kinds of licensing and, what we would have, but, how it could be regulated.
I think that's after you get the pulse of the
Okay,
community.
maybe,
I think we're getting way into the weeds at that point.
all right.
Speaking of
In any,
weeds,
but in,
So keep 1 and 2 and just label them as licensing? Is that the direction?
yeah, you'd like to keep 1 and 2, okay.
Separate.
What types of additional restrictions?
But I still liked, oh, never mind. Okay.
So if, on 3,
On 3, if, it should be,
if,
if it were to license marijuana establishments, because that's what, not allow, but license, because that's what we're talking about.
If marijuana establishments would become licensed in the town, that's what you're saying?
yes, then what
What
additional
additional
restrictions?
Yeah.
And everyone would be answering number 3.
Yes, I think everyone
None
would
of the
be,
above.
yeah. And,
yeah, if you take
Um,
the survey, number
conversely-
3 would be, an answer from everybody, whether you said no or yes. I think the number 5, I'm gonna jump over to number 5. This is where I think when staff is putting stuff together, we're gonna wind up with a big list of what people want
Be
to tell
like
us.
the sculpture out here, the big
Right.
list.
yeah,
So, I mean, is the whole idea of this to figure out
Maybe-
if we're gonna put it on the ballot next year, right? Isn't that correct?
I mean, that's eventually where we're going,
Isn't that, that's where we're going with this?
or
Or
not.
Or not, yes, right.
Well, we don't,
No.
doesn't have to go on the ballot.
Right, we could decide ourselves.
Oh, well,
The only
okay.
thing that has to go on the ballot is if you determine you want to refer a question to tax.
Right, so if we wanted to have an excise tax, it would have to go on the
Beyond the
ballot.
regular tax.
Um,
Okay.
would we want to take that question 5 out and sort of use that or think about that in a public meeting kind of a situation?
I almost think I'd just like to take 5 out, period, because that just opens the door for us to read 35 pages of,
I know,
comments.
of the same thing.
right.
Well, there's many people that can't show up at a town council meeting, so how is their voice gonna get heard?
They could certainly email us like that people have been before, right?
I think you could leave it on there, so you get 35 pages. That's our job as elected officials, to wade through this stuff. comments.
Just a thought.
I know,
Not
I
a problem.
know.
I've actually enjoyed the town survey, reading all the comments personally. I mean, so I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just, get ready,
We all know, get ready.
get ready.
Do you think we should move that to the end?
You could.
Yeah, that's
So your comments are at the end?
probably, and, speaking of the end, number 10, and I'm gonna jump all the way over to 10 and 11, and we talked about, whether you wanna put your name on there. Number 11 is gonna have to be thought
Well,
about, right?
I think, I mean, if I hear my colleagues, they're all sat, the majority feels people should put their name on it.
I think you ought to put your birth date too. I'm
Well,
not,
you have to put your age.
Well, you got age.
yeah, but, so,
But you're gonna write male or female, are we allowed to ask the females or?
You want to put their birthday instead of their age?
well,
Birthday instead of age?
I would probably tell you I was only 60 years old.
Oh, I see.
Uh-huh.
You're 60.
I'm 29 again.
I know a lot of people don't want to put their birth date out there. It's,
It's in the public record. You can go down to Pickton County and get everybody's birth date.
you can, but I don't think we should provide another opportunity
I,
for people to get their birth.
you know, if we're gonna put the name, if you guys wanna go with the name and stuff, and I don't even know if we need to add the physical address. I think you could
Just
just
put
say
post office
Snowmass
box.
Village.
I put my post office.
Because we are asking them, are they a registered voter in Snowmass Village? We're already asking that question.
Well, you may want to correlate the data
Yeah.
where they are absolutely a Snowmass Village
Right.
resident.
Well, number 6 goes year-round, part-time, Roaring Fork, guest.
Where are you?
Number
Yeah.
6.
Oh, I see, yeah.
But the rest just correlates.
Mm-hmm.
Can we change the language of number 5?
What would you like to say?
I just don't like it. I just think I don't know. I would like to say something like, do you have any additional comments you would like to share with us regarding the potential licensing of marijuana establishments in Snowmass Village? I just feel like it sounds kind of like, nah.
What else would you like to tell us? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, and I don't like that it says, what do you want to tell the town council? Like, obviously we're reviewing it, but lots of other people are looking at it too. It just sounds a little, I don't know. I just like that language better. I think
Can you
it
get
sounds
that
more-
over to Travis?
Sure, I'll give it to you when
Changes.
we're done.
Yeah, I have no problem with how you worded it, Alyssa. That sounds
It was well done.
Thanks.
You can't write that fast.
I can't even like make sense of it, but I'll tell him afterwards.
So it looks like you're gonna have to do another draft, Travis, and get it back to us.
We have a lot of time.
352 days.
Yay.
And who's counting?
I don't know.
But what is our
How'd I
target?
just ask Google?
Oh,
What
this-
was our target date to try to get this survey out? I mean, do we have a target date?
I think we ought to ask staff. We need to see it again, that's for
You
sure.
guys don't meet till December 4th, and I'll speak, I mean, we can make these changes and have them back to you on the 4th.
Okay.
Yeah.
How, when you do put the survey out, like how long do we keep it open for?
I think a minimum of 2 weeks is usually best practice, but
So do we also put an award or a prize on this, like we have for every other survey? People get a bong or something, or
Yeah, that would be great.
Or a teacher will
a,
look
fr-
too.
a free bong?
A gift certificate to one of the
See,
establishments
they
in
might
Aspen.
influence you
Depending
to
on what you
pull
ask.
the
No,
vote if you give away
Amazon.
wrong.
Is it possible to have it done by the 4th, Travis?
absolutely, yeah. Boss said so.
We'll get it out, we'll get it back to you.
Travis, so I saw that, this PTRAB letter, note. Do we have a mailing list from PTRAB?
They do have a separate email subscription list, yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
It's a few hundred strong, I think.
yes.
all right.
It's usually what they gather at their
That's
annual
about right.
meetings.
Okay.
It's gonna be,
Okay, so another draft, and then you'll get it back to us, and
December 4th.
thank you so very much.
John, you had a comment?
it's going to be hard to, I mean, you can listen to their opinions, but when they say are heard and counted on equal footing with those of your constituents, if there is a vote, they won't be able to vote.
That's right.
All right.
And I know you haven't made that decision yet, but that might be difficult to fulfill that demand.
And I know that Deb was well aware of that, and she put it in the letter. It's a consistent cry, though.
I don't know, we talked about the extra tax. Do we need to mention that so nobody's surprised that in the survey that there potentially could be An excise tax?
I think
No?
let's get the answer first.
Okay.
And then,
It's in question 3, not the excise tax, but a sales tax.
Oh, yeah, additional sales tax.
Okay.
okay, it's kind of, that was a mistake that Glenwood Springs made. There's on taxes, on the taxes of marijuana. That they could have added another tax.
Oh, they could have added it and they didn't.
They didn't, so they're working on it.
Yeah.
All their 10, 15 joints.
Yeah, you're right, John. Additional sales tax, okay. It's already there.
Okay,
Madam
if there,
Mayor,
yeah,
I mean, there is somebody in the, saying.
well, this is a work session for us. It's way past 6 o'clock,
Okay.
and I don't think, we're not required to do public comments during a work session.
In that case, I would make a motion to adjourn. It's a work session, we don't have to do that. We could just get up and leave.
Get up and walk out. No regular meeting.
I'm
Yeah, it's
sure
not really
Andrew
neat.
feels enlightened just by hearing your discussion.
I'd love to have taken comments, but I've got another pressing thing, I gotta be at 7.
So I put,
Do you have any additional comments you'd like to share with us regarding potential licensing of marijuana?
Travis, I think you did a good job.